Recording. Okay. So, hello everyone. Let me so yeah, today we're talking together here to talk about Jupyter Notebook diffs and the current state and the things that need to be done and the struggles me and Natalia have been through the last week, but it was fun. So, just as an introduction, what we want to achieve, like on 14.10, we released, we will release, it's already live, but we'll release the swap between cleaner and rendered run and render notebook diff, which is the markdown version, and just the regular notebook version diff. This is already working for compare and for commit page. So the backend is already in place. We are now struggling on how to bring this into the view part for MRs. So this is the goal that we're going through. We didn't want to add anything else, just you reuse what we have and display the same way on MRs. Yes. So let me share my screen because it's going to be easier if I go through over here. Share screen. I'm going to share my desktop. Sure. Share. So, okay. So what we did, let me open the MR that we've been working through. It's so what we've been working through is we are able to display this.
Eduardo, sorry. Before you go ahead, one of the things that would be very helpful for me personally and for everyone watching this would be to show the difference in the commit view between those two diffs. Okay. Just so we understand what we're talking about.
I don't have GDK open, but let's hope. I think this GitLab test has it opened.
Is it enabled in staging? No.
Yeah, it's enabled in prod.
Okay.
So it's GitLab test. And then, okay, I'm gonna find it over here. And then not on GDK, but GitLab test on GitLab.com. Test. I don't have it. Why? GitLab.com. GitLab test. So if I come over this one, add a Python files, and then I can see this commit over here. So where's the diff? Well, it's not showing up. Why is that? I enabled the feature flag. If I can, oh, because this doesn't have one. Add IPython files. Let me see a history on the commit. This was an invisible change. Okay, this one. But it's also not showing for some reason. Let me find on staging GitLab.com. GitLab.
Yes, sorry.
Just GitLab test. It should be at least on staging. Files. And oh, this is a node commit. It doesn't have the latest commit. But let's see if over here it's enabled. Okay, here it's enabled. So this is what we do in the commit pages. So you have the rendered or the cleaner diff for a notebook, and you have also the raw. So you can swap between both of them. And the comments, like the line on the rendered reflects a line on the source diff. And you can comment on the line of the rendered, and it will map into the correct line of the source diff, so on the raw diff. So if I comment here, for example, on line 8, it should add a comment later on the other side as well. So this is what we've done on the compare, and we want to bring this onto MR as well.
Okay, so I understand between those two versions, there's still a relationship that is kept between the lines on the rendered diff and the ones on the raw diff. So is that correct?
Yeah. So for example, the line 14 over here is the line 14 over here.
Got it. Okay. So that's in this particular example of these files, these notebook files. that relationship is kept. That's not necessarily true for all types of files, right? On Markdown, for example, the line, you could have multiple lines be rendered into the one single line, right? Is that okay? Okay, just trying to wrap my head around. Okay.
Yeah. So for this first version, we are mapping one line of notebook into one line of diff, but in the future that will be multiple lines of a rendered can be mapped into one line of raw as well. That it's not a one exact one-to-one relationship. Mm-hmm. This is kept because we made it like this. This mapping is our own work. It's not something that it's by default. And yeah, so
and this makes reviewing these changes much easier for the reviewer, right? Just so I understand, because I don't use Jupyter Notebook, so I'm trying to see the case.
So when you would review, for example, a markdown cell, which would look, I can't even find it over here. So this is a markdown cell. Instead of reviewing this line itself, which becomes hard to see, I can see it directly over here.
Got it.
It's much easier to parse, and it just strips away the noise. It's not perfect yet because it doesn't render the images that we want to do. That's the next step.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, because I remember we in source code, we worked in improvements to the way they're rendered. The files themselves are rendered. And it showed that little sort of like a key value list, right? Where you have a certain property, it has a value, and it just like comes down the file and renders it in boxes. And I don't have a link right now, but so this is similar, but at the diff level, right? Showing what was removed, what was added in a simplified view.
So yeah, we're bringing in the regular viewer that we have. For example, we have a viewer for notebook, but this is different. This is a viewer for notebook diff, right?
Yeah,
and it brings its own set of challenges.
Right.
So yeah, so we're porting this Chamar. But the problem is if we come over here and then we go, so we did this. I cannot run because I don't have GTK open right now. But on this merge request, what we can do, we did so far, we added already a swapper that swaps between them, and the discussions are mapped. Problem is that for here we add a new diff view with a new diff file. So this is a render diff file, and then if I go, if I search for this here, it's just a transformed version of the rendered file, swapping the lines for the rendered lines, right? The problem is, if I look into this, everything is fetched from the state. And by fetching from the state, I cannot pass this properly as a prop, because yeah, I can pass the lines, but every interaction with the lines is done through the state and not to the diff file directly. So my idea was, okay, let's decouple diff view from diff state. That is what caused this. Let me open here. This is this entire 9 MRs that we have here, because it's state.diff files is called over 30 places, and state.diff files is just one of the points that we need that are dependent on the state. You have also the discussions that depend on the root state. You have access to the file hash by file hash. Now you have 2 files per file hash, right? And yeah, so this is where we are now. So I have some ideas on how we could do this, but I don't know yet.
Right. No, I can share some thoughts that have coming to me. So, like we talked on Slack, one of the things that I would really recommend us do is definitely consult with Phil, the expert on this code base, or the domain expert, I should say. the other thing is that as I'm seeing you speak and talking, there's a couple of implications here that I think are crucial to have. Have you talked to any UX yet? Any UX designer yet? Product designer?
Here and there, yes.
Okay, because I feel like this, particularly in merge requests, we have a very strict roadmap for the UI of the diffs, and decluttering the UI. Particularly in your demonstration just now, I already came with a question for them, which is, you leave a comment on the render diff. Where will that comment show up on the diff view? We do show them on the overview tab, so they're always present, but we have one of the pitfalls on the merge request is making sure that the merge request comments display on the diff, right? So in this case, you make a comment on the rendered version, they should display on the non-rendered version as well. Is that your expectation?
They do. They already do.
Okay, cool. So that simplifies the hurdle, because from what I understand, the option to see the rendered view is a user choice, not the MR author choice. So the user goes in there and he clicks on the file viewer to switch to a rendered version. So the reviewer is the one in charge about how it's presented, right?
Yes, it's rendered by default, and then they can choose to go into the raw diff.
Okay, because one of the concerns we've been having on the front end, and I'll just speak about the front end, is exactly reducing the amount of work that we do on an initial load of the merge request. And it feels like a lot of these could be done asynchronously. Like we do, there's a little option to see the full file that iterates over the lines of the diff, to render all the diff lines. So that only happens when the user asks for that. So I feel like a lot of this additional load to do the rendered files could happen in an asynchronous way, so that only when the user asks for it do we do the work to render the rendered version, not render them by default, which I could be wrong, but I feel like that's what was happening there.
It brings both versions by default.
Yeah.
The default would be to bring the rendered, and then in a secondary action, intentional, bring the raw. This is something we spoke about. We didn't do yet because
I see.
One thing at a time. And then on the click, we could bring the other
version. I'm more concerned about the state load than necessarily the UI, because that's reactive. Because we've been having, so just for awareness, some of our test MRs sometimes reached, not so much now, but used to reach 1 GB of memory of footprint on JS heap, and that was a lot. So every time we try to do manipulations of the state, so that's probably one of the reasons why we're accessing state directly, to not have getters. Additionally, doing some overhead on memory usage. I could be wrong, but I remember we having long discussions about this. So that's why some of this code has a reason behind it, focused on performance. Now, we're all for improving it for sure. But it needs to be done very, very carefully in a way that it's one surgical, but also appropriate, in a way that you only pay the load if you're trying to do a specific thing, like rendering an alternative way of seeing the diffs. And more than anything, I feel like we need to think a little, so, and this goes a little bit also into product, which is, if we have rendered version for the diff files of this Jupyter notebook, what else could we use this for, and prepare the code for that, right? And this relationship between the lines can be broken. So that there's some implications there that we have some concerns. But so all in all, I'm just saying that I feel like there's a potential way forward with this, in a way that we can isolate a little bit the impact of this rendered version. I'm not, again, speaking, I think we need to involve more people in this effort about particularly UI, to see, for example, this particular key thing about making the rendered version the default, showing that by default, is something that they need to be brought in to understand how that applies, what's their vision, because they have a roadmap for the UI. So there's a conversation there to be had about UX, which will affect the code. As to the implication, yeah, I would need to consult with Phil to see about the replacement of the state diff files that you've worked on, how that impacts the rest of the application and our roadmap. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the current state is that on MR, we already show the rendered. The rendered is already there. What we're trying to now, was since 14.5, the rendered version is already there by default. This commit, the only thing that this commit adds or tries to add is be able to swap between the render and the raw. So the additional feature is being able to see the raw right now, right?
Okay. Well, we released that already. Is that it?
Yeah, 14.5.
On the commits view, not on the merge request.
All of them.
All of them. Oh, okay. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. This has been in there for a bit, and the only thing that this tries to change is add the raw, because we have received feedback that users want the raw as well.
I see.
Because when we clean up, we strip away noise, and sometimes the noise is not so much noisy, and people actually want to look at it, so they want to discuss on that.
Okay, no, sure, I understand. Okay. Oh, okay, so that's interesting.
So one way that we could go slow is, instead of trying to change diff view as it is, create a new tree of components over there for now as a beta, so that from that tree downwards is decomposed, and then we can wrap that within behind a feature flag, right? Because then we don't touch the source code. I isolate, and I have a setup where I can measure. Now we log on the backend the feature flags, and then we can measure the performance impact of having that feature flag on and off.
Right.
And like an A/B test.
No, 100%. I feel like that would definitely help us isolate the impact of this development. On those diff view decomposed, what sort of data will you have? Is it the diff lines? Like per file will have the diff lines?
Yeah. So the current version, since it's a text file, it's markdown. So everything below the file diff view would be replicated somehow. So diff view into all those things. So diff view, and then diff row, and then diff something row getter, and then diff line form, and then all those things need to be replicated because all of them touch the state. I'm actually, one thing that I started doing today, it's, let me try to find, is this. I went through the entire diff directory, and I'm starting to map the relationships between components, getters, mutations, setters, not setters, but mutations, and states. So for example, here we see that the app X uses the action start render diff skew. I have this for almost all of the components. I have for all of the mutations, actions, getters right now, and I'm going through the components. So this allows us to map out or create a graph of what's used where, and kind of like break down over time the dependencies that are happening over there.
Oh, this is pretty cool.
Yeah. So it will take, now I am diff file, so I have a couple more. I don't know how many we have over there. We have about 20 components or something. Yeah, 28 components. Some are larger, some are smaller, but I have to go through them and add their dependencies as well.
Right.
That would help with deduplicating, but starting from scratch on the diff view, like decomposed. But the problem is that, okay, I decomposed I decoupled the diff view. My goal that my ideas that I was thinking about was, in reality, the Jupyter is a composition of different file types internally. So you have an image file, a text part, and so on and so forth. And my idea was to use those components to build up the full render diff in the end. So for example, if I have an image on the notebook, let's use the image diff, because it allows for things. So everything needs to be decoupled so that I can pass a diff file for each of these components, right? Instead of relying on the state for those components. That is my end goal for this thing. So
yeah, that scares me. I'll be honest, that scares me a little bit, just because of the implications that has right now. Not that it's not a great idea, it is just that the implications of that to the code. Because, for example, so is the image file inline? How does that work? Is it inline, or is it reference
it's
with a link? Inline, okay, like an email, basically, like multi-part email kind of thing.
It's a base64 image within the file.
Got it. So that's even like a recursive viewer, kind of like a viewer that invokes another viewer. Got it. Oof. That. Yeah, we're.
I'm calling it a composite viewer. It's just like
right.
It's not two or three viewers depth. It's like one list of viewers, basically.
No, this is actually something that we have been talking about too, in a way to make the diff rendering being able to be ported back as a view app to the source code side. So as you noticed, one of the struggles that you found, I bet, was that the implementation of the merge request has nothing to do with the implementation of the source code of the repository. They're different apps. One is still in Haml, the other is in Vue, and they don't share a lot of code. So ideally, going forward, the commit view or the rendering of a diff in the repository should be pretty much the same code running it as the one on the merge request, right? That would be basically that's kind of what you're talking about. Decoupling that from the state would make you available. Just throw any diff file, any diff object to it, and you would just render it. We're still far away from that as we stand. So it's a great journey to go on, but I would not go alone. I would definitely get you some specialists from backend and frontend here, especially because they have their own ideas on how to make this for other problems that you might not be seeing. So I definitely feel like this is a work that needs more people involved to get you through that journey. And also about stability, I noticed that there's an info dev issue currently open related about the saturation of something. Is that handled already? Do you know?
They relate to Jupyter. We did some improvements. That was a while ago. There was a performance issue that we had. We fixed that. We added we had some guards against us to avoid that in the future. I'm adding one more guard today or tomorrow, and then perhaps moving the code to C as well to avoid even further the performance issues.
Okay. No, that's out of my realm for sure. That's backend. But yeah, all of this speaks to the complexity of and Eduardo, I'll be honest. A lot of this sounds, I understand, frustrating. I hate to be the one having that attitude, telling a new fire in his belly kind of thing, effort to say, hey, hang on, this is very tricky. But we've been bitten by this many times in the past, especially about performance, where we've just last summer shipped virtual scrolling after many years of trying to iterate on it and simplifying the state, and we've already managed great things. Like before, we used to have different data structures on the state for the inline and the parallel diff, and we've kind of we're able to unify it. So it's a bit of a journey, but a lot of it is involved work, and it usually has side effects that we didn't foresee. So what I definitely recommend is we need to have more people, more trained eyes on this, both on the back end and the front end, because a lot of these changes are significant to the way we render diffs. And we haven't even gotten to the semantic diff that I want you to talk about, because I'm really curious about that. So yeah, do you have any questions about that? Any comments before we move on? About getting more people involved. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, it's going to be part of it. This is how I got Natalia involved, because I know I don't have not both. I don't have enough expertise for this, and I don't have enough domain knowledge for this. I'm building up this out, but I feel that this is something that needs to be done if we go that way, and we are. So I'm trying to involve more people and getting this. Of course, this will go through MRs, and I think perhaps splitting might be the best idea, because then we can be safe that I'm not breaking anything up.
No, for
it
sure.
Might be
yeah.
A bit more work. Well, a lot more work. Actually, I don't know if it's going to be more work or not. Sometimes we feel something and then it's not reality.
Yeah,
and also we can
I'm guessing you can reuse some of the components down further on the tree. They don't all have to be dedicated, I guess.
Yeah,
but that's a conversation for later.
Yeah.
So go on.
And yeah, so on the semantic diff that we're talking, this is mostly a backend thing with the composite viewer on the front end part. So on the back, we will generate the semantic. So Jupyter Notebook is a JSON file. We'll basically do a semantic diff over the JSON. So we see which objects were changed, and then we create a view model for this. On the front end, the only thing that we need is one decoupled, well, only need to be decoupled with a composite viewer, so that we can pass, okay, this part will be rendered as an image, this part will be rendered as a text diff file, and this part is going to be rendered as whatnot, markdown perhaps eventually. So it needs a new algorithm on my side. This is what I would be building on, but I cannot. The algorithm is useless if I don't have the front end to render it, right?
Right. No, I see. So okay, so I guess that's what I was expecting. So basically, you will no longer be looking at lines per se, but you'll be looking at objects in a file. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. That is a phenomenal improvement that would benefit all of the diffs, not just the rendered one, right? And we've looked at competition tools that are doing just that with diffs. That's why I feel like there's a huge product dynamic here with these features that you're working on or pushing that could be hugely beneficial, but again, need to be prioritized in the product context, because semantic diffs are huge. And for example, you can roll out semantic diffs for Jupyter notebooks, which will have an impact on those users. But if we roll out the same mechanics for semantic diffs, and again, borrowing solutions, so we might start with the Jupyter notebooks, that's fine. But having a roadmap to roll out this to all the files would definitely be huge for code review. However, I have no clue how big that is on product's mind as it is.
Yeah.
Have you ever done something like that, like tracking objects on a JSON? Have you ever worked on that?
This is how I assign the lines. Actually, yeah, I implement my own JSON parser. Okay. Because then we assign the lines where does this object come from on that line. So we already started with this. Right. I guess we're out of time.
Oh, yeah. We are. Is it just 30 minutes?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So just it's like, yeah, everything that I'm doing, I'm preparing the ground so that it could be used for any file type that you're using. But I'm only focusing on Jupyter notebooks because that's my realm. But on the compare and commit, you could add any, and right now you can add any diff, any smart diff, any contextual, any render diff that you want. You can add it over there already. That would work. The only change now is the MR. Okay. And I'm focusing more. I am gonna working on the Jupyter, the part of this rendering. It's just that this is work that I need to do for me to get there. And my goal is the Jupyter rendered notebook. Despite the complexities, the complexities are just a step on the process that I need to go through, but that is the final goal.
Yeah, I feel like this is a great epic. I feel like, do you have an epic for the renderable diffs yet?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do. It's
we can link it later. No worries.
Yeah, I'm gonna link it later.
Because I feel like that's definitely an effort that is going to be multiple issues in multiple parts. We're going to have to abstract the viewers, each one of them, which in itself is a buttload of work. So first abstract the viewers, and then have another viewer that composites viewers, and that I think could be done generically. Start with a notebook, approach you with a notebook, but make that just an option of the composite viewer. which understands notebook or something.
Yeah.
Okay, I first thing and foremost, I would definitely recommend next week involving Phil, just to get his brain on this and see what he thinks about this approach. I think that approach of having a diff view decomposed, like that isolated way of working, definitely is the better way to go between updating the whole way that diff files are handled. I would go easy on updating the diff files, the state diff files there, the occurrences of those, just because that's a lot of intertwined code that depends on a lot of stuff. And for the fully renderable diffs, let's talk. Let's see how we can. And I feel like that's further down the line, right? So first is taking care of the raw diff view, and then later the fully renderable diffs. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
But
it depends on. Okay, we can talk later. Async as well.
Sure.
Continue this conversation in the chat. Cool.
If you could, Eduardo, I don't know if you're available tomorrow. I'm going to bring this up to the team, the weekly team for code review. I'll give them, especially to involve the UX folks. And if you want to be there, I can send you the time.
Sure.
But we're going to be discussing it, so might as well you be there.
I'll try.
Okay. Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Natalia, for helping Eduardo. You definitely
Just
helps.
for the record, I recommended going to Phil, I think, in the first command that I made to Eduardo, but he wasn't available. He was really busy with attention requests. So
no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you falling back for Phil. Always a pleasure. All right, great job. Thanks. Talk later. Bye.